It is really a pleasure to be able to introduce today's keynote speaker. Ambassador David Shear checks so many boxes for us here at 21 JPSI, and it is both a professional and I want to add a personal thrill to be able to host him here. Thank you so much for making the trip to Hamilton Lugar. As I was preparing to introduce him, how should I introduce him? I had the following thought, and I don't know if this will land with the students, but let me try. I sincerely don't think ChatGPT could even fabricate a bio more tailor-made for this conference than that of our keynote speaker. Not only is Ambassador Shear a dedicated teacher at SAIS, Johns Hopkins SAIS, he's a former Assistant Secretary of Defense and a retired career Foreign Service officer who spent much of his career working on both Japan and East Asia, including Southeast Asia as well, related issues that are very directly relevant to our discussions today. He is also the former chairman of the National Association of Japan-America Societies, and for good measure, he went to college right here in Indiana at another school with a storied legacy in the field of Japan studies, Earlham College. To get just a little bit more specific before I turn things over to our guest, Ambassador Shear served as U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asian and Pacific Security Affairs from 2014 to 2016. Prior to that, he was America's ambassador to Vietnam. Those postings were the culmination of 32 years in the American Foreign Service, during which his overseas posts included Tokyo, Sapporo, and Beijing. Meanwhile, in D.C., when he was posted in D.C., he served in the offices of Japanese, Chinese, and Korean affairs, and also as the special assistant to the Undersecretary for Political Affairs. Before he went to Vietnam, he was also the Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs. He is the recipient of the State Department's Superior Honor Award and the Defense Department's Civilian Meritorious Service Award for his work in U.S.-Japan defense relations. And in addition to his Earlham degree, he also has a master's in international affairs from Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, where he now teaches as an adjunct professor. If that wasn't all impressive enough, he also speaks Chinese and Japanese and has a first-degree rank in Kendo. Humbling to introduce someone with that kind of a background. So here's how today will work. This session will work. Ambassador Shear will offer about 15 to 20 minutes of prepared remarks. If time allows, I will sit down with him on the stage for just a brief bilateral engagement before we open things up to questions from the audience. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Ambassador David Shear to Indiana University.
Let me start in the interests of total transparency by saying that a first-degree rank in Kendo is the lowest rank. It's not the highest rank. The highest rank is the 8th degree. Dean Chorchari, it's great to see you again. Professor Liff, thanks for the great invitation to join you all today. And thanks to the Japan Foundation for supporting this event. I feel compelled to start by just saying, go Hoosiers. Good luck tomorrow. Good luck tomorrow. How's that for flattering your audience? I'd also like to start by sharing with you, since some of you may be thinking of actually joining the Foreign Service or in some other way, serving in the government in an international affairs capacity, I'd like to share with you how I got into the Foreign Service. And the short answer is by chance. First of all, how did I start with the Japanese language? Well, I started studying Japanese language at Earlham as a freshman at Earlham in 1971. In those days, in high school, you had to take a language achievement test, and I failed my French achievement test. So when I went to Earlham, I had to start all over on a foreign language. My advisor was a Japan hand who wanted to get more people into the Japan language program. I took the bait, glutton for punishment that I am. I spent 2 years studying Japanese, and then as a junior went to Tokyo for a year to study at Waseda University. How did I get into the Foreign Service? Well, there's another good story. In the late 70s, I spent a year studying Chinese at Taiwan University. At about the end of my program, by mistake, I threw my passport into the washing machine in my blue jeans and had to go to our new de facto embassy there, the American Institute in Taiwan, to get a new passport. And when the great junior officer behind the counter learned that I spoke passable Mandarin, he offered me a job on contract interviewing visa applicants. And I figured after 6 months of that, well, if these people can get in, certainly I can get in. I took the Foreign Service test in Taipei in 1979. To my astonishment, I passed it and spent 2 years while I was waiting to actually get into the Foreign Service. I went to SAIS. So if I can get in, certainly you can get in too. Just keep that in mind, and never waste an opportunity, even if it comes at you by chance. And if you're interested in finding out more about careers in the Foreign Service or in government and foreign affairs, feel free to ask me any kinds of questions in that regard you want after I finish. I spent about 10 years of my career in the Foreign Service as an alliance manager specializing in US-Japan relations. Alliance managers on both sides, both American and Japanese, are charged with strengthening our relationship and resolving the periodic problems that befall it. We played strong behind-the-scenes roles in creating today's US-Japan relationship. So I'm going to look at our ties with Japan from the perspective of a longtime alliance manager. As an alliance manager, I think that strengthening our relationship with Japan is necessary for the continued security and prosperity of the United States. And I want to tell you why I think so. First, I think the United States still has the ability to act globally, but that we need to focus more of our attention and resources on the Indo-Pacific region. We can do this without having to eliminate our commitments to Europe and the Middle East, as long as our European allies do more to secure themselves. On this point, I think I agree strongly with some members of the Trump administration. The Indo-Pacific region offers us huge opportunities. It's home to more than half the world's population. It accounts for 60% of global GDP and 2/3 of global economic growth. Trade between the United States and the Indo-Pacific region reached over $2 trillion in 2022, and the United States benefits from $956 billion in foreign direct investment from the region. China is at the region's heart, and it's not our friend. President Xi Jinping has stated that he seeks the, quote, rejuvenation of the great Chinese nation. He wants to outstrip the United States economically and technologically, and this is an integral part of his pursuit of that goal of the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. Xi wants to reunify China and Taiwan, deny the people of Taiwan the democracy they've worked so hard to achieve, and gain access to Taiwan's semiconductor technology. He wants to control the South China Sea's resources and trade routes, and is intimidating Southeast Asian neighbors in order to do so. The PRC leadership also wants a region free of US alliances. The Chinese know that our alliances provide us with huge advantages in diplomacy, trade, and the use of force. So alliances aren't just a military institution. They're a diplomatic and, in many cases, cultural institution, and they are fundamental to the current regional order, not only in Northeast Asia, but throughout the Indo-Pacific. The Chinese leadership also knows that they can't impose a Sino-centric security order on the region without a much diminished American presence. China and the United States are not natural partners, and a Sino-American condominium, or a G2, in which we agree they take their side of the Pacific and we take ours, won't work. We don't share the same political values, we don't share that many regional interests, and we are fierce economic competitors. To get a picture of what I think we should be doing geopolitically in the Indo-Pacific, let's look at American regional strategy from 1945 to the present, and I'll try to be brief. At the dawn of the Cold War, American leaders believed that our security and prosperity required a balance of power in East Asia that prevented a single country from dominating the region. That is a fundamental geopolitical principle in American strategy from at least 1945, if not even before the war. Henry Kissinger described the danger to the United States that a regional hegemon could pose in his 1990 book, Diplomacy. And if you haven't read it, I recommend it to everyone. It's a great book. Kissinger said, "The domination by a single power of either Europe or Asia remains a good definition of strategic danger for America, Cold War or no Cold War. Such a grouping would have the capacity to outstrip America economically and, in the end, militarily." So if the United States wants to stay as number one economically, militarily, culturally, we have to prevent China and anyone else on the Eurasian continent from outstripping us, or any combination of Eurasian powers. And that's what we mean by a balance of power that is favorable to our interests. To prevent the Soviet Union and China from outstripping us, we allied with local partners, including Japan, stationed our military forces on Allied territory, built a liberal international economic order, and encouraged the spread of democratic values. It worked. We won. After the Cold War, we stuck to this strategy as part of a hedge. On one hand, we hoped that Russia and China would acquiesce in an American-led global order. On the other hand, if we couldn't integrate Russia and China into our global order, we needed to have our alliances still in place to deal with a revisionist Moscow or Beijing. That we needed such a hedge was clear to both American and Japanese alliance managers as early as 1995, when China precipitated a crisis in the Taiwan Strait. People at my level sensed sharply, even then, that a rising China would be a significant challenge, and that we had to strengthen the alliance in order to meet that challenge. And that's when we started working on it seriously. 1996, the Joint Security Declaration issued by President Carter and Prime Minister Hashimoto really got the ball rolling. Our post-Cold War effort to build a free and open region was based on a variation of the logic found in Kissinger's book. It required that the US remain heavily engaged in East Asia because our allies can't balance China by themselves. But the strategy also relies much more heavily on stronger, more self-reliant allies, closer allied bilateral cooperation, and more cooperative diplomatic and military relationships among like-minded regional partners. Japan and other countries in the region stepped up. Australia, Philippines. They want us to stay engaged. Go out and ask the Japanese specialist in foreign affairs. They want us in the region. And if they didn't want us in the region, our days would be numbered. They're willing to do more to ensure that we stay there. So in this context, what's the continued importance of the US relationship with Japan? What's the importance of our alliance with Japan? Well, we can't continue to maintain a balance of power in the region that is favorable to our interests without having a much stronger and more self-reliant Japan on our side. Go back to 1950, when the great American diplomat George Kennan was devising the containment strategy. When he looked at Asia, he said, we need to have Japan's industrial potential on our side, not on their side. And that, even then, was totally consistent with where Secretary Kissinger was thinking. Japan has the world's fourth largest economy. Our two-way trade in goods and services in 2024 reached $319 billion. Japanese firms invested almost $40 billion in the US in 2024, and cumulative investment reached $819 billion. In this state alone, in Indiana alone, 314 Japanese firms employ over 68,000 Indianans. Did I get that right, Teresa? Good, thank you. Japan is an R&D technology and space powerhouse. It produces some of the most advanced electronic components, intermediate goods, and chemicals. Japan is also a growing military power. By my reckoning, it deploys the world's second most technologically advanced Navy after ours. It may not be the second biggest, China's the first biggest, we're the second biggest Navy. Altogether, the Maritime Self-Defense Force, for example, deploys 155 surface combatants and submarines, including 2 light aircraft carriers. The Japanese don't call, they're very discreet. They don't call them aircraft carriers, but they're aircraft carriers. And they're about to be outfitted with F-35 fighter aircraft. The Air Self-Defense Force fields 450 combat aircraft, and this is a formidable force that is now adding extensive offensive strike capabilities to its arsenal. Japan has strengthened itself institutionally as well as materially. Prime Minister Abe bolstered Tokyo's national security decision-making by establishing a National Security Council in 2013. He reinterpreted the Constitution in 2015 to allow stronger military support for the US in the event of a war in which the US is engaged. Prime Minister Kishida decided to drastically increase defense spending in 2022. The Japanese military has established a joint warfighting headquarters to better command and control military operations, and we're in the process of upgrading our own command in Japan to cooperate more closely with the Japanese. Evidence of our cooperation in pursuit of common interests is everywhere. Japan is one of the UN members that votes with us most frequently. We work together closely in the G7. Tokyo supports the maintenance of a liberal international trading system and has backed us in our wars in the Persian Gulf and Afghanistan. Our navies now operate together in the South China Sea and cooperate closely in building Southeast Asian ability to resist accommodation with China. This alliance is a diplomatic, economic, and military force multiplier. Diminish it, and you diminish American influence globally. You diminish our presence in the Indo-Pacific region, and you may even move our line of defense back from the Western Pacific to Guam, if not all the way back to Hawaii. And we know what happened the last time our line of defense was at Hawaii. We were attacked by surprise. It could happen again. There's a big debate about America's future, in concluding, there's a big debate about America's future role in the world going on in Washington right now, and I urge you to educate yourself about it if you haven't already. It has created a lot of uncertainty, both in Washington and globally, particularly among our allies. We don't yet know how this debate will turn out. By this time in previous new administrations, including the first Trump administration, the White House has released a national security strategy that outlines our national security goals, our priorities, and the strategy based on them. The administration actually released its national security strategy last night, and I wrote a lot about it in this morning, but we can talk about that in questions and answers. So the US has generated a lot of uncertainty in the world, and I think we need to remedy that. I believe that withdrawing from the Indo-Pacific region or trying to form a condominium with China will encourage a regional balance of power that favors Beijing, not us. This contravenes the strategic logic that Kissinger articulated. It contravenes all our efforts since 1945 to build a free and open region that doesn't threaten us. It'll result in a drastically weakened American regional presence and the likely emergence of an East Asian sphere of interest run by China. If the isolationists gain the upper hand in Washington in this debate, I guarantee you the result will be the establishment of spheres of influence, like in the book 1984. You'll have an American sphere in Western Hemisphere, a Chinese sphere in the Western Pacific and Southeast Asia. You'll have possibly a Russian sphere and a European sphere. And I don't think this is the direction in which traditional American policy has ever headed, and I don't think it's the direction it should be headed now. It's in conclusion, again, it's an alliance manager's job to fret over the future of the alliance. So I've done some fretting here today. I've been fretting for a long time, though. As I fretted about the future of the US-Japan relationship to one of my supervisors in Embassy Tokyo in the early 1990s, he looked at me and said, "The alliance is ours to lose." I think recent years have proven how right he was and how unfortunate, no, dangerous it would be for both sides if the Americans walk away from this relationship. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. You've given us a lot of food for thought. And I gather that there's a lot that also went unsaid in your remarks. And your final comments actually anticipated the first question that I wanted to ask you, which is, as you began your remarks talking about your background and your history of engagement with the region, you've been involved in formulating and implementing U.S. foreign policy towards East Asia and towards Japan specifically for over 4 decades. What is it about this current era that is different in your mind? You know, as you alluded to in your closing remarks, the 1980s were a period of a lot of friction in the U.S.-Japan relationship, and certainly as it concerns the U.S.-China relationship, it's been like this for a very, very long time. Is there something that you see as fundamentally different about this current historical moment in which we find ourselves? And is it a grounds for optimism or pessimism in your view?
I think it's grounds for caution. I see a couple of factors relating to the current situation. One is that our geopolitical strategy, the strategy that I described in my remarks, and our economic strategy now diverge. They're basically contradictory. We started the Cold War and continued in the post-Cold War period with economic strategy that bolstered our geopolitical strategy. It backed it up. And now with the way in which this administration is imposing tariffs, not only on our rivals, geopolitical and economic rivals, but on our allies as well, it undermines our geopolitical strategy. They are contradictory. And I think over the long term, if that contradiction lasts, it will be detrimental to US interests. We should be working together with our allies to pressure China, not just geopolitically, but to pressure China economically. And if we could work with our allies, it would add economically, it would add tremendous persuasive mass, you might say, to an approach to China on international trade.
Thank you. So you have a very, as I mentioned in my introduction, you have a very diverse background. You've served in the Pentagon, you've served in the State Department. My second and final question before we open things up to the audience is, you know, in our community of US-Japan Alliance Watchers, there's been a lot of questions raised about, okay, we're now 11 months into the new administration. Why hasn't there been a 2+2? Right? The 2+2 meetings involving US Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense and their counterparts from another country. There was allegedly, reportedly, one scheduled over the summer that was abruptly canceled. And as far as I know, has not been rescheduled. So imagine that the phone rings tomorrow or tonight, and Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth are on the other end, and they're asking for your advice. What advice would you give them about the top priorities for that first and very important 2+2 of what we can now refer to as the Trump-Takaichi era? What are the things that you would want to bring to their attention as their priorities going into that very important conversation?
Well, I'd want to reaffirm the strength of the American commitment to Japan. I'd want to give the Japanese the strongest possible reassurance that the United States stands by them as an ally. At the same time, secondly, I would encourage the Japanese, urge the Japanese to do more. They've come a long way, but they've got a long way to go. We need to be working extremely closely with the Japanese all the way down to the unit level militarily. And we're a ways away from doing that. I think the establishment of the Japanese Joint Headquarters shows great progress. I think the upgrading of US Forces Korea Command will help us a lot, but we've just got a lot of work to do with the Japanese to make this a a robust, real military alliance. Third, I would say that we need to reassure the Japanese that our extended deterrence remains strong. Our commitment to extended deterrence, the nuclear umbrella, remains strong. And this is, I think, a fundamental element of the alliance. Both Japanese and Koreans have questioned it to some extent in recent years, and we need to keep reassuring the Japanese that that nuclear umbrella is still spread over them.